The marsh grass was taller than us and blocked sight of everything. The sun was now setting, and there was no way our class and teachers were still here. This was before cell phones were a big thing, let alone among middle schoolers. We had no way of calling for help, but we refrained from screaming until the sun was practically all the way down and panic now started to set in. Suddenly it seemed we weren't alone. Jordan and I started to hear the splashing of water nearby, exactly the sound of someone walking through the probably knee-high water. We started to walk faster down the wooden pathway, and when we stopped again to listen, the splashing was still there, getting louder and closer. We didn't have flashlights, only the moon to light the way. We knew we weren't alone. Something or someone was in the tall grass, hiding, somehow watching us. Jordan basically had a fuck it moment and went to the grass where the splashing was coming from, pushed a bunch of the giant pieces to the side, and then screamed like a little girl. I didn't see what he saw, but I didn't need to. I ran right behind him down the pathway until we both had to stop to catch our breaths. He saw a person hiding in the grass, though I already figured that before he even told me. We kept running and then stopping to catch our breaths until the sound of a helicopter overhead came closer. We saw it, flying over with a searchlight on. We started waving our hands in the air, and whether that helped or not, I don't know, but eventually the spotlight landed on us and stayed there. We expected the helicopter to lower and pick us up because we were idiot little kids. So when it just hovered there, we were confused. But what they were doing was going where we were to the police search team that came looking for us, after our parents reported to the school that we never came home. We were eventually found by a bunch of police officers and led back to safety. We told them there was someone hiding in the marsh, stalking us, of course. Apparently Miss Stern either miscounted on the bus back to school, or she simply didn't do a head count at all. The buses left without us. Either way, she messed up big time. I'm surprised she wasn't fired. This was easily hands down the scariest night of my life. It happened when I was so young, too. In senior year of high school, we took an end-of-year field trip to Boston for our U.S. history class. Part of our assignment was following the Freedom Trail and viewing historical sites like the Bunker Hill Monument. There were of course some teachers and volunteer chaperones on the trip, but between me and my two friends Sean and Matt, we were all 18, so we easily convinced one of the more chill teachers to just let us go off and do our own thing. So we strayed off into the city and just messed around having fun checking out the place. We checked out Boston Harbor, where we got food at some waterfront restaurant. Then we checked out the Quincy Market and some other historical landmarks. And finally we ended up at this little cemetery called the Granary Burial Ground. This is where the horror to this story began. There were of course a few other people in this little cemetery besides the three of us. We weren't exactly that interested in it. We were just walking through it because it was basically one of the major things on the checklist of places that we were supposed to see. Anyway, there was this one guy who caught my attention. He was wearing this old-looking trench coat and a small top hat. It was definitely too warm out to be wearing a trench coat, I know that.
First game.
He had a gray mustache too, but that's about all I really remember of his appearance.
The
reason I picked up on him was because he was looking right at me, just standing still. He wasn't walking along looking at the gravestones like everyone else. I said to my friends in a slight murmur, "Why is this guy looking at me?" as I walked past them, making sure they followed me out of there. As we got back to the street, I told them more loudly that I was being eyed down by some weird-looking old dude. Neither of them took notice, but I didn't want to go back to point the guy out, so we kept walking. We were supposed to meet everyone on the trip at the Quincy Market at 5, so we started making our way back there. A few minutes into our walk, I turned around for whatever reason to look behind me. There he was again, that old man in the top hat not too far behind me. I noticed him through the crowd. He had on his same neutral, almost unhappy-looking face, his gray mustache covering most of his lips. And yes, it seemed like he was looking at me again. He wasn't even moving. I turned back to stay slow and didn't see anything. If it happened again, I'd know something was up. And it did. At the Quincy Market, when we were about to meet with the rest of the group, I saw that man again, far away by a street corner, facing me. He almost blended in with the crowd if it weren't for his top hat. I ran up to Sean and Matt and pressed their shoulders to get them to turn around and look. I pointed at the corner that the man was at not even 10 seconds earlier, and he was gone. I told them that that creepy old dude that I mentioned for the burial ground seemed to be following us, and kept looking at us, or at me specifically. I have zero clue where he could have went that quickly, though. It didn't make sense. That night at the hotel, I was having a nightmare, in which I was in my bedroom back at home, and I was hiding under my bed. I could see feet coming closer to the bed, until they stopped at the foot of the bed. and then the man in the top hat looked under the bed at me with a neutral blank expression on his face. I woke up only moments later to a loud thump in the hotel room. I had no idea what it was. I woke up Matt and Sean and the third guy who was in our hotel room, asking if any of them heard that. No one did but me. I still have no clue what that sound was. Years later, I was going through old photo albums with my grandparents around Christmas time. I stopped on one page. There was a very familiar looking man in one of them. He was wearing a very similar, if not the exact same type of top hat as the man in Boston all those years ago. He also had the same gray mustache and neutral expression on his face. I asked my grandparents who it was, and they told me he was my grandma's father. Now, I'm not saying I saw my grandma's dead dad that day in Boston. The resemblance my mind was playing tricks on me. That whole series of events still freaks me out to this day.
Bag. Come on. Fuck. Hate that shit, bro.
Back in November of 2013.
Let me
I was
fight.
in the 9th grade, and I went on a field trip with my Boy Scout troop to Alcatraz Island. For those of you who don't know, Alcatraz Island is a famous prison in the middle of the San Francisco Bay. We had the opportunity to sleep on the island in the prison cells. A few of my friends from the troop and I had elected to go, seeing as this was a once-in-a-lifetime. We arrived on the ferry around 2 p.m. or so. The tour guide was telling us about the history of the island and how there were a couple of men who once managed to escape and tried to swim away, but they were never found. The common belief is that they drowned, which is very likely because not only is it a far swim, but San Francisco is very windy and the water from the bay is super cold, so hypothermia is also a likely cause of death. As the tour went along, my friends and I were joking around about how this place was haunted. To make things even more thrilling, our tour guide decided to wait until midnight to take us to the execution area in the hospital. My friends Ash, Steve, and I kept trying to scare each other every opportunity we got, like I hid behind one of the dark corners and popped out when Steve was approaching. Eventually, we made our way to the execution room. Ash and I immediately picked up on how bad it smelled. Nobody else could smell anything, and the guide had said that the execution room hadn't been used in at least 100 years. Keep in mind that Alcatraz has been decommissioned since the 1960s. Plus, the bodies are taken away after execution, so the smell would only make sense if there were rotting corpses. Sure, there were some bloodstains, but they were like 100 plus years old. You are dead. Ash noted that it was weird that no one else could smell what we had smelled, and I joked around saying maybe some spirit was trying to freak us out or something. We went to the hospital next. I could have sworn I heard some sort of whispering. Ash and I immediately looked at each other as we heard the sounds, and the lights started to flicker at the same time. The guy told us that the lights always flickered, and then he started to explain how the mentally insane would usually come to the hospital, and how there was once this crazy inmate who always would whisper when he spoke. Kind of paralleled us hearing those weird whispering sounds. Later on, a bunch of us played cards in the scout named Kevin's cell. It was definitely quite the experience to play cards in the prison cell, I must say. It was around 3 a.m. when Ash asked me to go with him to the bathroom. I agreed, so we made our way over there. I had finished before him, so I waited outside while Ash was finishing up. I had been waiting for him for a while, pacing back and forth, so I decided to go back into the bathroom and check on him. I could hear the sink running, accompanied by the paper towel dispenser. Ash, are you almost done? I asked. The moment I said that, the sink shut off, and I heard a slam from one of the stall doors closing. Ash called out. No response. My heart froze from the most disturbing sounding cackle I had ever heard in my life. Oh shit! Shut. I turned around to make a run for the outside of the bathroom. I screamed for Ash, yelling this isn't funny, and he replied from the other side of the door, "What are you talking about, dude?" He opened the door, but I didn't stay inside of there. I went back outside and told him what just happened. His jaw dropped, and he had the most worried look in his eyes. Then he asked me, "If you were in here this whole time, then what was that breathing I heard outside?" We both realized that something was seriously off. We sprinted out of the bathroom as fast as we could, and made it back to the cells where everyone was asleep. We decided not to wake everyone and to just get some sleep. About an hour after falling asleep, I was awoken to the sensation of someone tapping my back. I scanned the room and saw nothing, but I knew I was not alone. With the slightest bit of vision in the dark, I saw something black in the corner of the cell. I let out a blood-curdling scream. My scoutmaster came over and asked me what the problem was. I didn't even know what to say. Needless to say, Alcatraz has a long history, and what my friend and I had experienced was nothing short of paranormal.
The fuck are you, bitch?
I used to be in the Darien School District
fuck
in
outta here.
Connecticut during my middle and high school days. It was a wealthier
Get the
district,
fuck
and a lot of
outta
field
here,
trips were offered to the
please.
students.
Please.
I was a member of the chorus, and every year we'd take at least one or two optional field trips as a class. The year in question, in which I was a sophomore, we took a trip to Woodloch Pines Resort in Pennsylvania. The bus ride there took a few hours. I was with my friend Landon. We were going to be sharing a room. From the moment we got there, we figured it was going to be pretty dead. It was November after all, so it was cold up there. We had 3 days planned for the trip, and there were 4 chaperones. They weren't really following us at all times, we just had to tell them what activities we'd be going to do. The first day was fun. Landon and I, along with 2 girls who we were friends with, did some go-karting, rock climbing, went in the pool, and then we went to eat dinner. After dinner, we went back to our room and just hung out for a while. For the record, not all the students were able to get rooms next to each other. The room was ground level, and there was a clear sliding door that provided a view of the lake down the hill. We went back out for a while, then came back to the room at about 10 o'clock. We left the blinds to the door open because the moon was giving off a cool reflection on the lake down below. Little did we know that would be the start of a nightmare. If I had to guess, I would say it was a whole hour of us just rolling around in both of our beds trying to
Hey,
get
bitch,
comfortable,
fucking-
occasionally talking,
fucking-
before Landon, whose bed was closer to the door, screamed.
Hey, pero fucking leave, puto. Fucking bitch.
I had no idea what was going on, why he could have been screaming, or if it was a joke, until I looked at the door. It was a sight from a horror movie. There was a really tall, skinny older woman with long gray hair standing on the other side of the door, with her hands
Fuck
cupped
outta
up
here.
against the glass next to her face, as if she were trying to better see into the room.
Puto.
The woman then walked
Come
away.
on, bitch.
Landon
Right
looked
here,
at
homie.
me, I guess waiting for me to
Right
get
here.
up so he would have the confidence to get up as well and run outside after her. When we did, we didn't see her anywhere though. The cement trail that ran past each and every room of the building was void of any people. There was
ain't gonna
nobody
do
in the
shit,
surrounding
bro.
grass, nor anyone walking down the hill. We both saw the woman
Bro.
though, so we knew we weren't seeing things. The next day we didn't tell any of the chaperones, but we told the 2 girls who we were friends with. Night came once again after a long day of many activities. We entered the
Bro,
room
you
through the
fair.
back door and made sure to shut the
You're
blinds
fucking
this
dead.
time. Landon fell asleep before me. I fell asleep around half an hour after him. I woke up to silence.
Did I hear a fucking car?
I couldn't tell if something had woken me up or not. All
Fucking
I
car,
knew
right?
is that I didn't feel right. I sat up and whispered Landon's name to see if he was awake. He didn't answer, so I turned to the left out of pure instinct and curiosity to
a
look
burst.
at him. But I couldn't see him.
Something.
Something was blocking
need
my view of the
No
other
assault
bed.
rifle.
I
Please.
looked up, and towering over my bed was the tall old woman. She took 2 steps back as
Like
she
that,
said,
huh?
"Your back door was unlocked," before turning around and walking outside.
Like that.
I was frozen in that bed, except for my shaking. I woke Landon and told him what happened. We locked the back door, shut the blinds once
What the fuck
again,
is this car?
and agreed to stay up the rest of the night.
What?
It was already 4 in the morning, so we wouldn't be losing much sleep. By 8 o'clock, we went to the dining hall to eat breakfast. When we got back to our room building ready to tell our chaperones, we could see the old woman through the glass of the neighboring room. She was sitting on the bed, hands folded, sitting up
Run!
straight, facing the door, facing us. We ran to the front desk in the lobby building to report her to the staff instead of the chaperones. It was weird, none of them really knew what to do in the situation.
Bro, why am I
Eventually, we
lagging?
persuaded them to come to the women's room with us. There, they found a woman sitting in the same position, along with an older man sitting on the other bed, looking up at them as they entered. Apparently, the woman had some kind of mental disorder, but the man wasn't all there either. There was something very off-putting about him, and they just weren't the kinds of people that you'd expect to see at a family-friendly resort. The staff wouldn't kick the two out like we hoped though, so we told our chaperones.
I need some mini.
Long story short, after a lot of arguing between chaperones and staff, we had to end the trip early, and we all went home. Me and Landon were just happy to get out of there.
Appreciate.
When I was in the 4th grade, my class took a field trip to a rural zoo-type place about an hour away from our school. I remember vividly it was a cloudy day with the occasional raindrop or two falling. The zoo was kind of small, but it was kid-friendly. It had a decent amount of habitats, mostly smaller animals though, nothing exotic.
Thank you.
There was also a big building as part of the zoo where taxidermied animals were put on display, along with other interesting attractions that I don't really remember. Admittedly, I was kind of off in my elementary and middle school years. I would do weird antisocial things and my teachers and my mom would pick up on it. For whatever reason, when we were touring the building as a group, I decided to walk into one of the bathrooms without telling any of the teachers. I did my business, washed my hands, and entered back out into the hallway. Nobody was around. I walked down one of the hallways we hadn't crossed yet. I still vividly remember the dim, moody lighting and the scarlet red carpets of the hallways.
I hurt you,
My
bitch.
8-year-old imagination was going wild as I witnessed all the stiff, lifeless animals that were once alive behind the glass boxes. I stopped in my tracks when I saw some man, obviously hiding behind a stack of chairs. I think I laughed, thinking the man was joking around. He came around from the chairs and walked over to me, asking where the group went. I said, I don't know. He grabbed my hand and told me to follow him. I must have thought he was taking me back to the group. He led me to an exit door which led to the back section of the building by a couple of dumpsters, a few benches, and the woods. When we got outside, his hugging became a lot more aggressive, and his grip became tighter around my arm. He was pulling me into the woods. I didn't scream or cry for help, but I remember the feeling I felt in my stomach, like I was so afraid that I could throw up. And then a woman screamed at the top of her lungs. It was one of the teachers on the other side of the fence. The man let go of me and ran into the woods. Moments later, a few of the teachers ran outside the exit door to this side of the fence and pulled me back inside.
I'm afraid of.
The teachers all yelled at me, but at the same time comforted and smothered me. They called my parents, and the field trip was officially over. The owners of the attraction called the cops. We all got back on the buses, and we all went home. As my bus was leaving the parking lot, however, my observant 8-year-old self spotted the man crouching down in the woods near the road, hiding behind a branch, watching the buses pass. Once again, for whatever bizarre reason, I kept quiet. I was probably too shy at the time or just too shaken up to say anything. All the other kids looked at me weird the rest of the ride home. I didn't care. But I hope that man never found success in snatching an unsuspecting young child like myself at the time. Back in high school, I took a mysteries and mythology type class, or something like that. I don't remember the name of the class. It basically just had to do with real life mysteries and creepy shit. I was into that kind of stuff. I was taking the class with a good friend, who I'll call Ben for this story. The teacher of the class took us on a field trip to a nearby abandoned village with an unknown past. The village was built in the early 1900s, but seems as though it had been quickly abandoned shortly after it was built. The bus ride there was about 20 minutes. All of us were glued to the bus windows as we pulled up some sketchy-looking, decrepit road cutting through dense forest. The road eventually led to a clearing. We were there. We stepped out onto the road, which had grass growing through the cracks. The grass surrounding was almost knee-high. Then there were the buildings. The tall, archaic brick buildings with the boarded-up windows all gave off such chilling vibes. The teacher lined all 20 of us up, counted heads, and then began leading the way. The point of this little field trip was to use the so-called skills we learned in class to see if we could put anything together about why the village may have been abandoned so long ago. Some of the buildings had holes in the walls to serve as entryways. There were even holes in the ground next to some of the buildings, seemingly dug to get into the basements of some of the buildings, which seemed creepy. There was one building though. It stood taller than any of the others. It just intrigued me the most. While the teacher was leading the group towards the village church, Ben and I decided to sneak off on our own to look for anything interesting. When we walked off in the direction of the tallest building, we saw a hole in the ground. It was dug by the back door of the building, which had been sealed off. In the hole was a ladder, which led down to the concrete floor below. We both looked at each other and knew we had to do it. Ben climbed down first, then me. Luckily, this was just around the time Apple started putting flashlights on their phones, so we had a source of light.
Oh shit.
It was creepy down there.
Oh.
There were a couple of beer bottles, one graffiti tag on the wall, and dusty wooden planks everywhere. There was a wooden stairway which led up to complete darkness, since all windows and doors had been sealed shut from above. We had already gone as far as to enter the building, so we figured we'd go up the stairs too. I went first, and with each step, the creakiness of the 100-year-old wood made me feel as if I was going to fall through each and every step. Ben followed suit. This floor of the building was very tight. It seemed like there were many openings going off into different, smaller rooms. It was so dark in there, you would never even guess it was daytime. Ben and I were honestly starting to get creeped out in there, and agreed to go back outside. But just then, there was a noise in one of the tiny rooms. Like a big rock hitting the concrete floor. A normal instinct would be to run, but Ben and I froze, locked eyes for a moment, then both tiptoed over to the opening of the room.
Oh, baby.
We shined the lights into the room and ran. We ran back down the stairs and then up the rusty ladder back outside. We caught up to the group out of breath. We didn't say anything though to avoid getting in trouble. One of our classmates asked us what was wrong. We told him we snuck into one of the buildings. And in one of the rooms, when we shined the light into it, we saw 3 guys standing maybe 10 feet away from the doorway, facing Ben and I in a weird formation, as if they were waiting for us.
Did that motherfucker get sniper or something?
As we continued following the group, we paid extra attention to the tall building we entered from the distance. And before leaving, we saw a person's face at one of the higher level windows that had not been boarded up. We never told the teacher in fear of getting in trouble. We didn't know what to think. Were those just homeless people living in there? Were they gang members in hiding? Ben freaks me out with his theory. He says they were ghosts of the people who once lived in the town. Still, the way the 3 guys were just hauntingly standing there so calmly, staring at us the moment we peeked our heads through that doorway. I still can't get that image out of my head.
Come on.
I may go back to that village one day, just to prove Ben's idea wrong.
Damn it. Go back at it again. Where's my girl? Is there?
I'm currently in a predicament, and quite frankly, I don't know what to do. I'll start from the beginning. 5 years ago, my next-door neighbor Charlie, or Charles as we call him, informed us of his 14-year-old son's disappearance. He reported it to the police, it was on the news, it was everywhere. Me and my wife felt absolutely awful and always offered to help them out in any way we could.
Sheesh.
As the years passed with no word of their son, we assumed they eventually came
Yeah,
to terms
bro.
with it and
Ow.
realized the worst had probably happened. Me and my wife never had the nerve to ask if the body ever turned up.
Fuck yourself.
Occasionally, Charles and his wife would invite me and my wife over for a barbecue during the warmer months. We noticed neither of the two were ever the same since their son had gone missing. Charles' wife Kathy was always quieter and more reserved, and Charles just seemed more awkward and nervous, both understandable to a certain extent.
Oh, man. Why
Fast
you gotta be
forward
so
a couple of
sweaty,
years
bro?
later to just last week.
Tell me,
Charles came over to me when I was taking out the garbage and asked to borrow a shovel. Without hesitation, I ran to get him my best shovel, not asking why he needed it. He thanked me and said he just had to do some work in his backyard and he'd get it back to me by tomorrow. He then disappeared into his backyard. I went inside, and when I was by one of my upstairs windows that has a clear view into Charlie's backyard, I could see he was digging out a really big hole in the ground. He seemed to be struggling a bit. He's 56 after all.
Skippy.
I figured I'd go grab my second shovel and help him out. As I entered his backyard and called his name, he looked up from what he was doing, dropped my shovel, and hurried over to me, saying, No, it's okay, Tim, I got it. Please, just leave. I said, What's wrong with you? It's not a big deal. Mainly because of his bizarre reaction. He told me I will not allow you to use that shovel in my backyard, and then pointed to the gate as if I were a dog. I was so taken aback by how he was acting that I just left without saying another word. I went upstairs to spy on him through the window. He was digging the hole for at least another half hour. When it finally looked like he was done, he started looking around, like up high at neighboring houses as if to check and make sure nobody was watching. And then, before I could think to hide, he spotted me at my window. All I could do at that point was casually walk away. He was up to something, and I wanted to find out what. I continued to look in his backyard every so often. He wasn't digging anymore. I figured he knew I was watching now and would wait until it was dark out. And I was exactly right. At 1:30 in the morning, I heard the sound of a shovel hitting the dirt outside. It was too dark to see anything from my window now, so I snuck outside quietly and looked over the fence in the backyard. I could see him digging loud and clear now. When he went inside his house, I took that opportunity to sneak into his backyard and take a look at what was in the hole he was digging. The moonlight alone revealed a small piece of a black garbage bag protruding from the dirt at the bottom of the hole.
To be sure.
I looked at his back door and back at the hole. I did this 3 more times, deciding whether or not to see what was in the bag. In the end, I decided to run back to my backyard, and it was a good thing I did, because he came back outside seconds later. But he wasn't digging. In fact, he disappeared to the other side of his house and didn't come back.
Fuck, bro.
I went back into my house and quietly got back into bed, trying not to wake up my wife.
Yeah, I should keep the fuck.
The next day, the first thing I did was look out my window to see that the hole in the ground was completely patched up in Charles' backyard. I also noticed that his SUV was parked in the street now instead of his driveway. I don't know what happened throughout the rest of that night, but I'm disturbed to think that what was at the bottom of that hole might have been his son's body. For all I know, he dug up that hole to remove whatever he had previously buried down there and drive it somewhere else to dump it. This is all speculation, call me crazy if you want. I haven't told anyone, not even my wife. And quite frankly, I don't know what to do. Charles never gave me back my shovel. I'm not going to ask him for it. In fact, he's been avoiding me ever since. And something disturbing happened yesterday. I by coincidence happened to look out my window across to Charlie's house, and caught him standing at one of his windows looking into mine. When he saw me, he shut his blinds, and that was in the middle of the day. I have no idea what to do, but I'm honestly terrified. I've lived in 3 houses in my life, 2 with my family and my current house by myself. We lived in the first house for the first 15 years of my life, and the second house the next 7 before I moved out to my current home.
This experience happened in my first home when I was 15, within the last few months of my family living in that house.
How you doing?
I don't remember my family ever
How you
being
doing? How
really
you doing?
friendly with the neighbors. In fact, there were 2 kids living next door
Who's
with their
watching me
dad
right
that
now?
me and my brother had only talked to maybe once or twice our entire lives. As bizarre as that is. Though we did know both of their names, Eric and Todd. One day, me and my brother,
Local
who was
squad.
5 years younger than me, were
Hey.
outside playing basketball
Our
in the
local
driveway.
crew.
That was when one of the 2 boys next door, Todd,
To the
came
local
outside
crew.
and walked over to us,
Hey.
initiating the
Welcome
conversation.
to a local squad.
I don't remember what we said to each other quote for quote, but I remember the first thing that he asked us was if it was true that we were moving. As the older brother, I did most, if
Am I
not all, of
weird?
the talking.
Yes, it's a,
Todd was probably the same age as me. I
Stay
never
local.
actually asked.
too crazy.
By the end of the conversation, he invited me to come with he and his brother to shoot
Estoy
BB guns
loco,
by the
estoy
river in the
loco.
woods down the road the next day.
No pickaxe here.
I agreed since it was the weekend and I didn't have anything going on anyway. My little brother asked me if he could talk for a second, not under the assumption that he was automatically invited as well.
Yeah.
Todd said yeah and then
It's
walked
not my
away.
day, bro. What the fuck?
Late the next day, around an hour before dusk, Eric and Todd rang the doorbell.
Shit.
We were quick to answer the door because our parents didn't know that we were going out to shoot BB guns.
BB guns.
Walking down the sidewalks with Todd and Eric decked out in camo gear and carrying a duffel bag of BB guns was really strange. The level of seriousness these 2 clearly had in this was really weird to me and my brother, and we kept meeting eyes, holding in our laughter a couple of times because of it. We got to the woods having spoken very few words. I could already tell these 2 were kids of few words. Maybe why we hadn't met them officially until that point. Todd dropped the duffel bag onto the ground and unzipped it, while Eric aggressively snapped a branch off a tree and threw it into the river. Me and my brother looked at each other again, this time not finding it as funny. Todd pulled out a couple of guns and handed them to me and my brother, and that's when Todd dropped the bomb and told us they were real guns. Eric grabbed a loaded gun from the bag and began firing at trees across the river. When I realized he wasn't joking about the guns being real, I was in a mix of anger and confusion.
Like some
I grabbed the
scary
gun from my
stories.
brother's hands
Like
and
the
placed
scary
both of them
stories.
back in the bag. I told them we weren't comfortable with this and had to leave. Eric stopped firing, and they both looked at us with expressions that seemed half angry. One of the 2 boys yelled a curse word at us as we were walking away.
Walking
I
away.
always had a feeling these 2 were bad kids, but this confirmed it. I told my brother not to speak to them anymore for the remainder of our time living there.
How the fuck that shit is?
We told our parents at the dinner table that night that they were
Está
really
loco
weird
ese pedo,
kids,
what
but
the-
we didn't mention the gun thing. I woke up that night to a breeze of cold air hitting me in the face.
Hello, hello, hello.
My window was open all the way. I felt something hard press up against the back of my head as I was
Going
looking
back
out
to
the
Gracie,
window,
bro.
and somebody
I have to,
behind
I need
me
to, I need to.
going, "Shh." Somehow I didn't scream or jump. I just stayed calm.
6
I was
more
able to
days,
understand
bro.
what was going on surprisingly
season.
quickly. I heard Todd's voice in a whisper behind my head. He told me if I ever told anybody, especially his dad, about the guns or the visit, he would come back and kill me and my entire family. I replied in a quiet, shaky voice, "Okay." He pushed my head with his gun before leaving through my window. Every night thereafter for months, I would catch either Todd or Eric at a certain window of their house, looking into either my or my
I
brother's
gotta
room.
find my house, homie.
Their behavior
fucking
became
house.
more and more strange
What the-
as we got closer to the date of our
Just for
move.
that, you're gonna die. So what
Just
you
a
see?
week before we moved, a rock was thrown at my window one night at like 1 a.m.
You're gonna die. Put
I opened my window and saw Todd aiming a pistol up at the window. And
Get some
feeling like I
heels.
was about to die, I dove for the ground,
them.
only
Push
to
it.
hear the 2 boys crack up in laughter. I heard one of them refer to me as a fucking retard. There were 2 other instances that week where the 2 would harass either me or my brother, and ultimately, I couldn't think of a more perfect time for us to have moved and gotten out of there. After all these years, neither me nor my brother told anybody
Fuck,
about the boys or their threats. All I know is those 2 boys were trouble, and it was a good thing we got out of there.
Bro,
when
the
we
shit
did.
ain't broke. Wow. Wow.
At the time I'm writing
wow.
this happened 2 weeks
what
ago.
The fuck was that?
I've always
I
hated
got-
just about all of my neighbors. I'm fresh out of college and I'm living on my own, but that comes at a
Wow.
price. I'm living in a really shitty
What the
area, the
fuck
only
was
place
that,
I can
bro?
afford a
What
house.
the
So I'm not
Bro,
bound
what
to have the ideal
fuck was
neighbors.
that?
The neighbors on one side always have their music blasting, while the neighbors on the other side are the creepiest people I've ever met in my life. It's two people living next door. One woman in her 60s who's not friendly at all and honestly doesn't seem all there, and a slightly younger woman who has some kind of severe mental disabilities. I have no idea what the relationship is between the two. I would commonly be sitting on my front porch when I'd look over next door and see the older woman holding the younger woman back as she'd be having some kind of freakout episode. She'd have her arms crossed and she'd quickly rock back and forth while screaming and making noises. Sometimes she'd even look over and point at me and mumble stuff to the other woman. It's quite disturbing, actually. Sometimes I even go inside when I get too uncomfortable. Anyway, it was a night like any other. I had to go to bed early for work in the morning. However, the next door neighbors were making an unusual amount of noise. I could hear the deranged woman screaming and throwing a fit as the older woman yelled in distress.
Shit.
This went on for about an hour, and I couldn't take it anymore. I marched over to the house next door and banged on the door. The older woman answered and greeted me with a "What the hell do you want?" I asked as politely as I could to keep the noise down.
The fuck do you want?
In response, she raised her eyebrows and tilted her head down, clearly annoyed by my request. Just then, the younger woman entered the living room, screaming, "How dare you," repeatedly. The older woman held her back from approaching me, and then slammed the door in my face. I had no idea what just happened, but I felt like I didn't accomplish what I came there for. I walked back to my bed in defeat.
Fuck weird, bro.
However, I realized they had finally gone silent next door. I was able to get some sleep at last.
Not taking no damage from Will.
Well, I woke up, feeling like the night went way too fast. I looked at my clock and saw that it was only 3 in the morning. My head fell back into the pillow in relief, but pretty soon, I thought I could hear something come from downstairs. I got out of my bed and went over to my door just to make sure I wasn't hearing things. When I didn't hear any other sounds, I went back to bed. I woke up once again to a dark room. Only 20 minutes had passed since I'd fallen back asleep. I didn't know what could have woken me up, though. And then I heard. I panicked and tried to find my phone on my bedside desk as a source of light, but when I found it, I didn't dare turn the light on. I looked around the dark room in silence, trying to find some kind of dark figure in the room. I looked at every corner of the room, and even though it was so dark, I could tell there wasn't anybody standing there. This time I heard where it was coming from. I turned to the edge of my bed and saw a black shadowy circle-like object right at the edge of the wooden wall of my bed. When the light of my phone revealed that black object to be the face of the deranged woman from next door, she screamed like the lunatic she was. She screamed as if she were a vampire in the light. I screamed as well. I screamed as I clumsily ran for the door and tripped halfway, looking back to see the woman following me. I slammed the bedroom door behind me and ran all the way downstairs, where I locked the door leading to the upstairs. I called the cops as the woman pounded on the door, screaming incomprehensible things. When the cops showed up, I told them the woman lives next door and that she was mentally insane. The older woman from next door came over after hearing all the commotion and spoke with the cops, pleading with them to let her go, but they insisted they had to take her in for at least the night. One of the officers asked me if I wanted to press charges, and as he asked this, the older woman gave me the most evil, hateful stare imaginable.
What the fuck am I lagging?
I chose not to press charges, but her stare didn't change. The officers drove the ill woman away, while the older woman continued to stare at me as she walked back to her house. 5 minutes later, I saw her get in her car and drive away. These two still live next to me. I'm seriously considering moving out because the creepy woman next door makes it clear she despises me. And I've concluded that the mentally ill woman is not only terrifying, but dangerous as well.
In fact, no bullshit. What the fuck is wrong with you, old lady? Ratas. Yeah, bro, if you want to fight, let's go fight, homie. Fight to the death, huh?
I was 16 in my junior year of high school. I had 9 periods in the school day. The first period was lunch, and straight from there was my astronomy class.
Confused by that, bro.
My astronomy class was actually held in one of the 2 basement classrooms of the
Him
school.
with this shit.
My high school was big. There were 3 floors, and even that wasn't enough to accommodate all the classes offered. So the school built 2 classrooms in the basement. It was honestly kind of creepy down there where nobody else was around. It used to be a janitorial area. However, it was remodeled to better resemble a typical hallway. The only thing, there were no intercoms or loudspeakers down in the basement at that time. For that reason, no classes were held down there first period for the morning announcements. Everyone referred to this little section of the basement as the chamber, and everyone always tried to get classes down there just because it was air conditioned and the classes were typically easier. Plus, it had its own bathroom down there. We had a quiz in astronomy that day. Usually I was one of the first done just because I found the class easy. After I finished my quiz, I texted my friend who was in the other basement classroom to meet me in the bathroom because I was bored. He told me okay. I walked out of the classroom and down the small hallway to the bathroom. A few seconds later, the door opened and my friend JJ entered the bathroom.
JJ?
We were joking around for a while until JJ checked his phone and said someone texted him saying the school was going on lockdown. We both looked at each other with the same grins. Neither of our teachers saw us leave the classrooms. That meant we had free range of the school while it was on lockdown. We agreed to sneak upstairs and look around the hallways just for the hell of it. The worst that would happen is that we'd explain how we couldn't hear the announcements in the basement classrooms. Upon opening the basement door to the main floor, we were surprised to find all the lights had been turned off, so the hallways were pretty much pitch black aside from the light pouring in from the doors in the lobby. This was legit because usually the lights were left on in the hallways during lockdowns. Something was going down. We didn't know if we would be comfortable walking.
That's bullshit, bro.
JJ stepped out
That's
a little
some
further
bullshit
into the
right
hallway,
there.
and I followed suit. JJ then looked down the hall and said, "Who's that?" I looked, and emerging from the darkness was a man. At first, we couldn't tell if he was a teacher or not.
Pissed me off.
But as he got closer, we realized this guy wasn't dressed at all like any staff member. He was dressed like a bum.
How?
Alright, let's go. I told JJ as we hurried back down to the basement. He surely saw us, whoever he was. We saw both classrooms had their doors shut and lights off. So to avoid making a scene, we decided to hide in the bathroom. I shut the light first thing, and then we both went to hide in the corner stall. There was complete silence in the room. No ventilation, no heaters, nothing. Just the sound of me and JJ breathing, and an occasional drip from the sink. The door to the bathroom suddenly opened, and light from the hallway poured into the bathroom for a brief moment. The door shut, and the bathroom was once again pitch black.
Fuck, come towards me.
Me and JJ tried our best to control our breathing. The room was so silent that we could hear somebody walking over to our side of the bathroom. The person stopped and started breathing really heavily, as if they were out of breath.
Shh, nobody can find me.
Me and JJ were both scared to death.
Nobody can see me.
JJ did something very dumb. He whispered in my ear, "You have to crawl out through the other stalls." The room was so silent, however, that even JJ's whisper could be heard from across the room.
Get the fuck away from me.
The heavy breathing outside the stall stopped, and the person tried pressing the stall door in.
Go away, no.
That was when I whispered, "Go, go," to JJ.
Leave me alone.
We both crawled under the sidewall to the next stall over, and then the next stall, and then finally out to the other side of the bathroom.
Fuck you, bitch.
The person was now full on banging on the stall door. Me and JJ hopped up off the floor, opened the door, and as the light filled the room again, we saw the guy from upstairs in the corner. We pounded on the door to JJ's class. The teacher let us in within seconds. JJ explained everything as the teacher locked the door, mentioning a gun sticking out of the man's pocket. I was shocked to hear this because I didn't see it, and I went along with it anyway. Usually a bunch of high school students would be laughing their asses off at 2 students causing a scene like this, but I noticed all the kids sitting in the corner looked concerned. A sudden bang at the door made everyone jump, and a couple of girls squeal out of fear. JJ, the teacher, and I could see the man standing at the door, looking through the window while trying the doorknob. After a few bangs on the door out of what seemed to be anger, he turned and walked down the hallway back to the stairs. We don't know how much longer the lockdown went on for, but for over an hour we sat in silence in the room, other than the teacher occasionally asking me and JJ questions in a very concerned tone, shaking his head after everything we would tell him. Eventually, somebody from upstairs called the teacher and he instructed all of us to single file walk up the stairs and out of the building, where we would be greeted by cops. Me and JJ did the best we could at describing the man to the cops and to the dean. One of the cops patted me on the back and we were sent off to go home. After this incident, the school installed cameras everywhere and ramped up the security budget. This incident never got media attention, so honestly, we never found out if police caught the guy. I'm convinced that man had no other intentions but to kill us then and there in that bathroom stall.
Be right back.
I'm a retired New Jersey police officer. Throughout my 20 years in the force, the most disturbing call I ever received was for a school lockdown happening at a nearby middle school, of which I'll leave out the name for legal reasons. It happened on a stormy, dark day. My car number was called on the radio to respond to a lockdown, where a suspicious-looking man was seen stepping out from a white van parked behind a school and walking into the back door by the boys' locker room. I pulled up to the back parking lot of the school, right next to the white van. Nobody was inside and all the doors and trunk were locked. I opened the red back door that entered into the gym hallway, right by the locker rooms. The main lights had been turned off, so the whole inside of the school was dark. I unholstered the flashlight from my belt and used it to navigate the halls. I made it to the lobby of the school, where a woman emerged from the front office quietly, telling me to check the boys' locker room, but to be careful because the person might be armed. I called for backup on my radio and was assured backup was already on the way. I made it back to the hallway I entered from, where I found the boys' locker room right next to the exit. I pushed it open very quietly. There were no windows in the rooms, therefore there was no light whatsoever in that locker room. Only the light provided by the flashlight. There was a white noise in the room, some kind of vent on the ceiling blowing air. But even over that, I was hearing faint scratching type noises, or little dings on the locker doors from the other side. I was supposed to make my presence as a police officer known, but honestly, I was just too scared. The tension in the room was insane. I held my flashlight in one hand and my gun in the other as I snuck to the other side of the locker room. It seemed like wherever I was in the room, the dings and thuds would be coming from the other side. I was standing in the corner of the locker room, right by the door to the bathroom, when the sound of someone slamming a locker door from another room made me jump out of my skin. I went in the direction where I heard the slam, to find out that it was from the boys' football team locker room. There was no door separating the main locker room from the football locker room. The lockers in here were also 3 times the size. I finally had the nerve to make my presence known by shouting police. After shouting, a kid started screaming help from somewhere in the room. It was very muffled though. The kid pounded on a locker door on the other side of the row I was in. When I found out that the boy was trapped inside of a locker, I felt sick in my stomach. I told him I'd be right back, once again calling for backup while running outside to where the white van was. It was gone. My biggest mistake was not getting the plate number first thing. I told dispatch to be on lookout for a suspicious white van. I ran back into the school and instructed the staff in the front office to end the school day and to send somebody with a key to the locker room to get the boy out of the locker. The boy was held by the man with a knife on his back, as I speculate the man was quietly trying to get the 12-year-old boy to his van. The boy was bleeding on his arm from the man cutting him while resisting. The man's van was spotted a week later in a 7-Eleven parking lot, where he was arrested after being properly identified.
Raptor. Whoa.
I was staying in a Hampton Inn in New Jersey when I was visiting Rowan University, a college I potentially wanted to attend. My family couldn't come with me, so I was on my own. After attending campus tours, I went to get a bite to eat at a nearby restaurant, and then went back to the hotel at around 8 p.m., planning on going back to campus again the next day. About an hour after returning to my room, a strange alarm started going off in my room, along with a white light flashing from the corner of the ceiling. A message started looping shortly after as well, saying something along the lines of, "All Hampton Inn guests, please remain in your rooms, this is a lockdown." I'd never heard of a lockdown in a hotel. I never even knew hotels had alarms like this. I found it more interesting and exciting than anything else. Eventually the sound of the alarm stopped, but the light kept flashing, and every 20 seconds or so the message would repeat. It was only like 9:30, so I turned on the TV just as background noise while I started changing clothes.
Oh
and
shit,
brushing
it's
my
different.
teeth. I shut the lights when I was done and hopped under the covers. I watched TV for half an hour before shutting it off. The light was still flashing with an obnoxious bright white every few seconds. It was definitely going to hinder my sleep. I was starting to consider calling the front desk to ask what was going on, when the phone rang. It was someone from the front desk. I was expecting them to tell me something about the alarm and when it would shut off, but instead the person on the other end spoke in a very concerned voice. She told me to remain calm and walk out the door. I took that opportunity to ask her what exactly was going on. She went on to tell me that there was somebody in the room with me and to get out immediately. I dropped the phone and instinctively started looking around everywhere. Part of me was curious to see if somebody was in fact in the room. I checked under the bed, looked into the empty bathroom, nobody in either spot. Then, I noticed the closet door right next to the bathroom. It was one of those closets with a wooden sliding door. It was open just a tiny crack, and through that tiny crack, I could see a person's face. At first, it didn't sink in what I was seeing, but when the door slid shut, that was when I freaked out and ran out the door. The people at the front desk showed me security footage from an hour earlier of some sketchy-looking man walking around the hallways, apparently looking for a certain room. When he got to my door, he opened it with the card he somehow acquired, and that was it. I stayed around as the authorities took the person out in chains. It was a man, of course, on the shorter side, easily 40s. He looked at me as he passed, as if he knew who I was immediately. It's scary thinking back that he may have been watching me for more than an hour from that closet.
Keep going.
For a very brief 2 minutes, I worked as a delivery driver for the app DoorDash. It was to make some quick money on the side on the weekends. I live in a suburb of Nevada, so deliveries are usually quick and fast. Someone made a big order to a local burger joint, and I accepted the delivery. When the food was finished, I loaded it into my car and checked the destination. It was a house across town.
Jesus Christ.
I tended to drive quickly over the speed to get more deliveries out, aka get more money. When you drive like me, though, you're bound to get into some trouble.
That money, boy.
And this time, as I was driving up the block towards the cul-de-sac, I saw the sickening glow of the blue and red light in my rearview mirror. I pulled to the side and got rid of a ticket for more money than I'd possibly even make that night. It was a horrible feeling that I'd spent my night doing deliveries only to end up losing. Still, I had to finish this delivery. After the cop got back in his car, I drove right down towards the cul-de-sac. I got to the house, ran towards the front door, and knocked really hard since there was apparently no doorbell. As I waited for the door to open, I looked around this cul-de-sac. It was so dark because there were no streetlights.
Only the small
Shit, you
amount of
got
light that was
nothing,
given
bro.
off by the 3 total houses
Can I
sitting
kill you
on the
worse?
street.
Worse?
It was a pretty unusual
Okay, bro.
dead end. Not a nice looking spot by any means. The house wasn't exactly the prettiest either. The door finally opened. An average height bald guy
I'm
opened the
good,
door.
bro.
He had a grayish beard with brown stains. His body language and way of behaving was immediately weird, screaming drunk or a drug addict. To top it off, his breath was awful. He said, "How you doing?" in his loud, obnoxious voice. He told me to come in. I told him no, it's okay, as I held out his bag of food, waiting for him to grab it so I
I
could
didn't know what
leave.
the fuck he wants.
He said, no,
Alright,
come in, I
keep
got
his ass
something for you.
First,
I told him,
man.
really, it's okay, I need to be.
You got
He said something
nutty,
along the lines
bro.
of not being able to tip me through the app, so he'd have to give me some cash money. Against my better judgment, I entered the house with his food still in my hand. I heard a car pulling up into the cul-de-sac as I stepped inside. As soon as I cleared the door, the man slammed it shut and told me to follow him to the kitchen, and to put the food on the
Same
table.
guy, huh?
For some reason, even as uncomfortable as this guy made me, I followed him through the disgusting, messy, smelly kitchen. He went into his basement and told me to wait there in the kitchen. He shut the door, and I heard him stomping down his steps. I stood there feeling
What?
awkward, but also
What the fuck is this?
there was a short silence, and I stood there looking at my phone, texting a couple friends about what I was experiencing currently. Suddenly, there was a huge crash from down in the basement. It sounded like a big shelf holding a bunch of smaller items toppling over, followed by what was a scream for help. It seemed as though the man was hurt by whatever had fallen down. I ran to the basement door and opened it, and to my surprise, looked down to see nothing but darkness. Not a single light was on. I called down into the basement. "You okay?" I heard the man moaning in apparent pain in the
Look
darkness
fucking
below.
okay?
I asked where the light
Question
switch
is
was. Instead, he just kept saying help.
Oh,
I used the flashlight on my Samsung to start walking down the noisy, creaky stairs. As I got maybe halfway down, the man's moaning sound stopped, and it was completely silent. I stopped as I realized how silent it had been, and asked if he was still okay. There was no response. Suddenly, I got a really bad feeling in my gut. Something wasn't right. I heard a small cracking sound from in front of the steps, like a pebble being crushed against a concrete floor.
they'll be, bro.
Then there was a loud knocking at the front door upstairs. I turned and ran upstairs to open it. It was the cop who had pulled me over about 5 minutes ago. He was holding something familiar, 2 folded pieces of paper clipped together, asking me if it was mine. It was, and I grabbed it. But I also told him in obvious distress that I thought something strange was going on with this man who I just delivered food to. I told him it sounded like he got injured downstairs, but that it also seemed suspicious. I showed the cop to the basement door, and with his hand on his holster, he called down into the basement. I told him there wasn't a light switch. So he took out his flashlight and started walking down the stairs slowly. I waited at the top of the stairs as he progressed to the bottom step, then disappeared from my view. I didn't wait too long before hearing a commotion downstairs. The cops seemed to be yelling in response to being attacked. The commotion ended with a gunshot. Then there were cries of pain, genuine cries this time. The cop called up to me to come help him get the guy upstairs. He asked me to hold the flashlight as he guided the man who was now cuffed up the stairs. All the while, he was screaming in pain and at the cop. The cop brought him outside and called for an ambulance on his radio. He wanted me to stick around to sign a witness statement. I stuck around for about half an hour before I left and went home. Who would have thought the same cop who wrote me a ticket would potentially save my life 10 minutes later? I occasionally do some deliveries for Postmates, usually late at night after work during the week or on weekends. I use my motorcycle as it allows me to get from point A to point B faster. I was delivering some Mexican food to a guy named Ron. It was a 15-minute drive from the burrito place to Ron's address. When I got to the listed address, I brought the food up the long driveway and up to the front door. I rang the bell, and an older woman opened the door. I said delivery for Ronnie, but the woman looked confused and said there's no Ronnie here. I apologized and said I had the wrong house. So I went back to my bike and double-checked the app, making sure I was at the right house. And according to the app, I was. The house number was 15, just like listed on the app. I figured it was time to call this Ron guy to figure out if he had made a mistake with the address. I used the call feature on the app, but after one ring, it went to voicemail. So I tried texting instead, and within seconds, he replied back. I told him the address he gave me was wrong, and he swiftly said, yeah, sorry about that. He explained that he didn't actually live here, but that he was chilling with his friend in the preserve across the street from the house listed on the delivery. He requested I come into the nature preserve by the fire and drop it off there. He mentioned he was sorry about this and was planning on leaving a generous tip. One time before, I did have someone request I drop off their food at a park near their house, so at that moment it didn't seem like the strangest thing in the world. It was just a slight inconvenience, but one that he'd apparently make up for with the tip. The preserve was gated, but there happened to be an opening leading into it right across the street from the house. I followed the dirt trail until the light post ended, and any further I would be walking into complete darkness. I looked around for the light of the fire, and as a matter of fact, I did see a hint of light coming from the woods. I started making my way over into the increasing darkness of the woods, leaving the lit up area. As I got closer, I could confirm it was light from a fire. Why were they in the middle of the woods, though? And the question of why they were expecting me to bring it to them out there started to ring in my head. I yelled out Ron's name a few times when I was within yelling distance of the fire. No answer. When I got close enough, I noticed something. There was no one sitting around that campfire. I asked myself, was that the right fire? But that was a silly question. How many fires could there be on a weeknight in the preserve? I walked a little closer to the fire and noticed a tent behind it. Maybe they were in there. So once again, I yelled Ron's name as I approached the tent. It was zipped up. I tapped on the tent and said Ron's name again. So I finally unzipped the tent and knelt down to look inside. I saw someone laying down on their stomach, facing away from me, so that their shoes were only a few inches from my face. They seemed to be asleep. This was getting a bit ridiculous, so I just marked the order as delivered and turned ready to walk away. I didn't even make it a single step before noticing someone standing about 20 feet from me, between two big trees. He called out, "Are you alone?" "No," I said. "My friend is just over there." The guy asked, "Why aren't you alone?" I said I do my deliveries with a partner. He asked, "Where's my food?" I was about to tell him it was in the tent, when I felt two hands grab both my legs and tried pulling me down. I looked down and saw the arms reaching out from the tent. Ron, presumably the guy who I was just talking to, started charging at me. With only maybe 5 seconds to act, I did manage to escape the grasp of the two hands and run past Ron, if that was even his real name. I don't think he chased me after I left the vicinity of the fire. I found my way back to the bike easily, and I drove off without taking a second to look back. I contacted Postmates customer service about it. They told me I should escalate it to the police, as there was nothing they could do. By the time they even responded with that, I didn't even feel up to going through with a police report. I just figured I'd let it go. I got lucky and I was unharmed. Still, it taught me one thing.
No,
If your instinct tells you to turn and walk away, do it.
No. Oh, no. Hey.
For some reason, I never really used any of those food delivery apps until recently, after learning how convenient they are. One night after a late work shift, I didn't have time to make dinner, so I ordered some Chinese food off Postmates.
Chinese food.
It was originally estimated to be delivered in half an hour, but I waited a lot longer than that. Around the 45-minute mark is when I started getting impatient. I called the Postmate driver, and he picked up after a few rings. I asked him where he was. He asked, "Who is this?" I said Tracy, the girl he was delivering food for. There was a short silence. Then he said, "Oh yes, I'm on my way." So I thanked him and hung up.
I sat in my living room with the TV on and basically just played around on my phone, dying for the Postmates driver to just show up already. Just then, my phone started vibrating, and knowing that it was likely the Postmates driver calling me, I felt very relieved that the food was probably here at last. I picked up and waited for him to say something. I had to say hello like 4 times before he finally started speaking. He said he's outside. I didn't really know how to respond to that, so I said okay, and then described my house to him. Then he said something weird. He asked me to come outside to get the food. I opened my front door to check if he was there. He wasn't. I asked him where he was as I stepped out onto the front deck. There was another pause. I looked around my whole front yard and didn't see anyone. I told him I didn't see him. He said, "I see you." Again, I didn't know how to respond, but the way he said it was just so creepy.
Kick his ass.
The last thing he said before I hung up the phone was, "You look really pretty."
Whoa.
At that point, I went inside and slammed my door shut and locked it.
Oh, mommies.
I opened the Postmates app,
fuck
and it said my food was delivered.
Bro.
I didn't know what was going on here. I was growing increasingly uncomfortable. I shut off all the lights in my house and started looking out each window. I started with the living room windows. Didn't see anyone.
Fucking shit, bro.
Then I checked the dining room windows. Nothing. Next, the kitchen. Still no one. So I went down to our den and opened the door. I hadn't raised the curtain that morning because of work. So I pulled the string to raise it up. Only a little bit. Just enough to peek under to check the backyard. The time I was looking out the window, I don't think I actually
Why
expected
is
to
my
see
game
someone.
so laggy,
But when
bro?
I looked under the curtain to the den window, I saw a man sitting in my back patio. He wasn't on his phone, he wasn't doing anything. He was just sitting there, as if he were waiting for me. I lowered the curtain back down, and then my phone rang. It was the guy again. I picked up, and he immediately said, "I just saw you at the window." All I said to him was, "I'm calling the cops." And I hung up. I went back to the living room and called the cops. The man on the phone said an officer would be over shortly. After I hung up, my phone kept ringing. It was the man. I kept rejecting his calls, but he wouldn't stop.
He's
Sitting
fucking
there
ass, bro.
waiting for the cops
He's
was
ass.
one of the most tense moments of my life. Eventually, there was a knock at the door, followed by a man shouting, "Police." I jumped off the couch and ran to open the door. I was confused to see not a man in a police uniform, but some man in some dirty street clothes, with me with a disturbing smile as soon as we made eye contact. He opened the storm door and tried to get in. I pushed the front door hard enough to get it shut and lock it. He didn't bang on the door, he didn't scream anything. I think he simply ran off after that. A few minutes later, the actual police showed up, and they searched the property with me. I found the man's phone left on the table in the backyard. The background to the phone was a white guy with a blonde girl, presumably his girlfriend. I note this because the man who was on my scoop was not white, he was Hispanic. I did a little detective work with the cops and came to the conclusion that this man was not originally my Postmates driver, that he had stolen the driver's phone somehow mid-delivery. The police confiscated the phone and left after taking a report. As far as I know, that man never returned to my house. But it was easily the scariest experience of my life.
You got fucked over. No food. Waste of money. It's crazy too, cause I was in a hotel. The motherfucker left it my food to someone else. I was like, what the fuck, bro? What
I
room?
was a really little kid. This
I know,
local
I went
small
to go
amusement
look
park
for it.
that used to be opened by us would hold this annual event called
Nothing.
Pumpkin Land, which was held on the Saturday before Halloween, where candies would be given out to kids in between
Did I hear a
rounds.
chest?
Pumpkins would be scattered throughout the park for
What's
families to pick up
tripping?
and take home before leaving. I always looked forward to it, and this one particular year when I was 7, we were going right after my soccer game. The park also rewarded kids for coming in costumes, so I was going in my cliche Scream costume.
Anyway, my parents took my 2 siblings and I, and when we got there, my brothers begged to go on the haunted house ride first, and then the roller coasters. Basically, they wanted to do the most thrilling rides first. Anyway, my mom and 2 brothers got in one of the cars for the haunted house ride. Since they only seated 4, my dad stayed with me on the line so we could ride together. And I think as I started to get cold feet, I felt like I needed to use the bathroom. So we got off the line, and my dad led us to the bathroom. He went too, but I finished first. So I waited outside the bathroom.
Ooh, legendary.
I waited for a while.
Oh,
I
bro,
was
you
kind
got
of
to be a
confused.
fucking rocket, bro.
Eventually, I went back to the bathroom, and my dad wasn't in there. That's when I started to panic. I was alone in a huge crowd of people, and at 7 years old, I was actually scared of being lost. Eventually, a man came up to me and asked where my parents were. I told him I couldn't find my dad. He took my hand and told me to go find them.
Jesus.
I remember him leading me with
Christ.
a tight grip of my hand, and suddenly he pulled out his archaic Nokia brick cell phone and started talking to someone on the other end. The only major thing I remember him saying was, "Oh, I'm with him right now," as he looked down at me and smiled. Then he said, "Okay," and hung up. He looked at me again and said that I was my dad, and that he was waiting by the parking lot. He continued to lead me, but even at 7 years old, I wasn't an idiot. I was wise to the fact that my dad did not have a cell phone, and that this stranger probably didn't know my dad. How would he even know who I was if I was under a scream mask? As we were approaching the front gate to the park, I spotted a female employee and started saying, "Excuse me," over and over until I got her attention. Then I said, "I don't know him, please help." The man defended himself, saying he knew my dad and was trying to get me to him. But the employee took my side and asked me to come stand by her so she could use the loudspeaker to find my parents. The man didn't stay a second longer after that. He walked away quickly into the parking lot. The employee announced over the park intercoms that the child in a scream costume was missing
Go,
his
let's
parents
go,
and knew
let's
my
go.
name. Eventually, my dad came running over, waving his hands. He was a nervous wreck. The employee told him of the potential predator and the possible attempted kidnapping, and that's when he lost it. When my mom came over, she was just as furious. My parents asked the manager to see the surveillance footage. Somehow, at that time, the amusement park didn't have any surveillance cameras, according to the
fuck?
manager. Still, my
the
parents
fuck are
thanked
they
that
gonna have
employee for getting me
cameras?
away from that man, and we tried to have a normal day after that. I was too young to realize the severity of the potential situation I had just avoided. Obviously, remembering it as an adult is a lot more sickening to think about. When my mom and stepdad went on their honeymoon, I wasn't trusted to watch the house for the week, so they sent me to my Uncle Ronnie's farm. He lives with my Aunt Susie and my cousin Ronnie Jr. I have a spare bedroom upstairs that I stayed in. It's an old-fashioned style wooden farmhouse. It's big and nice, though. The spare bedroom overlooked the crops and the numerous scarecrows my uncle had scattered through the crops. This was in mid-October a few years ago, and my uncle was mid-harvesting his corn at this time of the month. He asked for my and Junior's help. Weirdly, it wasn't tedious work. Like, I kind of enjoyed
Wait, said
doing
people
it.
live?
He wasn't using his combine. Instead, we were just hand-picking a bunch of corn. I had this little rolling basket-like thing that I was supposed to fill up. I admired the 3 scarecrows he had. They looked like he put a lot of work into them. They had sweatpants on and varying flannels, along with straw hats over their heads. When we were done picking the corn, I asked Uncle Ronnie how long it took to make those. He said a few hours at most, and he said they really do the trick keeping the crows away for the most part. That night after dinner, I played video games and smoked weed with Junior for a little bit. Then I just went to the guest room to do whatever on my laptop. Next thing I knew, a rock or something hit the window. It scared me for sure, as there was no way that wasn't intentional. I didn't want to go look out the window to check though. I just closed my laptop screen so there would be total darkness in the room. I crossed my fingers it wouldn't happen again. But when a second rock hit the window, my heart felt like it dropped out of an airplane. The room was still completely dark, so I gave it a minute before getting up to peek out the window. There was a full moon out, and one of the outside lights was off, both lighting up a decent amount of the crops and one of the scarecrows. I continued to look around, but when I saw something moving in the corner of my eye, I looked back at the scarecrow to see one of its arms waving at me. No, Surely I was hallucinating. The waving stopped, and the arm moved back down to its side. I shut the blind and wanted to throw up.
What the fuck is
I
this
had to
thing?
go and open the door, but by this point in the night, he was already asleep.
Don't understand.
I closed his door and checked downstairs for my aunt and uncle. But all the lights were off downstairs, so I checked their bedroom, and they too were both asleep. I went back to my room and lifted the blind just enough to peek out there. The light outside was now off, but with the bright moonlight, I was able to see the scarecrow was still hung up on the stick. I looked out that window for over a minute, waiting for it to move again, but the longer I waited, the more I realized I must have been higher than I realized. I finally dropped the blind back down and climbed into bed. The next morning, I went downstairs to my Aunt Susie making us all pancakes. My uncle was already outside doing work. Aunt Susie called Junior down to eat before all the pancakes were done. Around that same time, my uncle stormed into the house.
Get shit out, bro.
The three of us went outside. My uncle leading us to show us that all three scarecrows were missing from their posts. That's when I told him what I saw last night, and how at first I thought I just imagined it. At once, the nightmarish realization hit me that somebody did in fact throw rocks in my window. They did see me looking out, and someone was posing as a scarecrow. That night when we were all sleeping, the doorbell rang continuously at like 1 or 2 in the morning. I heard my uncle and Junior yelling in the hallway and running down the stairs, so I followed. When he opened the front door, the 3 scarecrows were posted up right in front of the porch, all with red paint stains covering them, mimicking blood. My uncle called the police and turned on all the outside lights on the property. The police, as well as my uncle, chalked it up to some stupid early Halloween prank by a bunch of immature kids. But the possibility that it wasn't, and that it may have been a much more hostile motive behind this, is what really freaked me out. It was November. All the leaves were varying shades of yellow and orange. My favorite time of year to visit the countryside. I was with my girlfriend at my dad's upstate home, which was usually used as a summer home, but the two of us came up there to go camping in the nearby woods. The home had all the needed camping supplies, including the tent, so we parked there and took the camping stuff into the woods. Why? Just the experience of camping and sleeping in the woods, I guess. I've only been camping a few times in my life, but I liked camping in the fall because there's less bugs and of course you can't beat the foliage. We were camped out in a small circular clearing, just big enough for our tent and campfire. We sat around the fire for about an hour, eating and just talking. Then we went inside the tent. We kept the fire going, as it made my girlfriend feel safer, and it added a bit of fun. Besides the sound of the fire,
What the fuck is that?
crunching in
I
the
hit him
distance.
twice and he
My
still didn't
girlfriend and I
die.
looked at each other. She put her finger up to her lip. I could tell she was nervous. Fires usually repel wildlife from approaching, so as the crunching of the leaves got louder, I got more suspicious. Footsteps also sounded bipedal, like a human's footsteps. The crunches got louder until they stopped around the fire. Then we noticed the shadow outline of someone standing out there, and they sat down in one of the chairs. They didn't say a word, so I finally decided I was going to peek my head out and check. I looked out to the campfire, expecting to see someone sitting on one of the chairs, but there was no one out there. I got up on my legs to look around the campsite, into the trees and darkness. I didn't see anyone out there. My girlfriend was whispering something. I knew that she was urgently trying to get my attention. So I went back inside, and she said, "It's on." I replied, "There's no one there." She replied, "What are you talking about? I see him in the chair right now." I looked at the wall of the tent. I saw the shadow outline of the person still sitting in the chair by the fire. I realized that was impossible, though. I crawled back out of the tent to look one more time, and both the chairs were still empty. I went back inside and said to my girlfriend, "We need to go right now." She didn't ask questions. She got straight up, took my hand, and followed me out of the tent. She saw there was no one sitting in the chair. She screamed. I yelled at her to shut up, and led her through the near total darkness in the direction back to the mobile home.
A robot
Running,
chase
we heard
after
this
me.
horrible groaning sound not too far away from us. One single loud crash of a tree branch or something. This caused both of us to scream, "Oh shit," and run even faster. How we found the property was by repeatedly pressing the car lock button until we finally heard the car horn. We went into the mobile home, locked the door, and hid under the covers in the safety of the bedroom. Still, I didn't feel entirely safe being surrounded by nothing but woods in every direction, and I was paranoid that whatever was out there followed us. I let my girlfriend sleep while I stayed up listening for sounds. I thought I heard a clicking or something from the front door to the home. That might have been my paranoia playing tricks on me. I fell asleep eventually. When we woke up, I went back for the tent and supplies, scared shitless while doing so. Nothing was moved except for the one chair we thought we saw the shadow sitting in. It was knocked over. We hurried back to the car, drove home, and that was our last camping adventure. This happened when I was 12 years old, an age old enough to be aware of my surroundings and have a pretty good sense of danger, but also still around that age that attracts a certain selection of creeps. We live in a decently busy neighborhood. However, we're on a dead-end block near a forest preserve, and across the street from us is a sump, and if you were to go through the forest preserve, you would find yourself in a small community park. There was this one Saturday night that a mini carnival was being held in the park, and since I wasn't doing anything with friends, my mom suggested that I go check out the carnival. She isn't the kind of mom who tells her kids not to go out past dark. She always let me do my own thing. So I did end up going. I crossed through the forest with a flashlight and eventually passed the fence that led to the park and saw lit up carnival rides everywhere. A Ferris wheel, a mini roller coaster, some of those big spinning rides, and of course concession stands and carnival game booths. It was late enough where it wasn't very crowded. There was also a big circus tent with the red and white stripes where I saw some people entering. I poked my head inside, where I saw 4 rows of people in the audience, and on this mini stage were 3 clowns performing tricks. One was on a tricycle, one was juggling, and the other was just dancing around. Then the dancing one noticed me poking my head inside the tent, and he skipped over closer to me and started waving his index finger, signaling for me to come closer, or to come onto the stage. I didn't really know. All I knew is I didn't want to do either, and so I walked away. I ran into a friend at one of the carnival games, and I hung out with him for about half an hour. Pretty soon the carnival was closing down, and everybody was starting to leave. I said goodbye to my friend and made my way towards the woods again.
What the fuck are you
I was
here,
near the fence when I heard, "Psst." It came from behind me. It was one of the clowns. The clown that was waving me over earlier. He asked me if I wanted to check out the backstage area of the circus tent and some of the cool things the guests cannot see. I said no very quickly and walked into the forest, looking back every few seconds to make sure I wasn't being followed. And I wasn't. The clown just stood there watching me, with the painted-on smile on his face making the situation even more disturbing. When I was out of view, I began to run for a bit before I was confident he wouldn't be able to find me. I was not going to tell my mom what happened because I loved being allowed out whenever I wanted, and I feared that this might ruin that. It's a half-mile walk through the woods. I was probably 3/4 of the way there when I heard it again. Psst. This time, I immediately felt sick when I heard it. I turned and saw the same clown walking out from the darkness of the woods into the light of my flashlight. When he was close enough, I threw the flashlight at him and ran for it in the direction of my house. I heard him close behind me until the road was visible. Then I heard him turn around. When I got home, I was breathing like I had just run a marathon, and my mom was of course concerned. I still didn't want to tell her what happened, so I lied and said I jogged the whole way back. After that, it never came up again.
Up until the age of 14, I always had a fear of clowns, ever since I was first greeted with one at the age of 5 at a county fair. On a cold Tuesday night in November during break, my parents were on vacation and my sister and brother were out for the night. My friend, who I'll refer to as B, wanted to come over so that we could walk to the fair a couple blocks away.
Wow.
So he did. We walked to the fair, which happened to be in a big empty parking lot. We walked around for a little while and played some of the carnival games. Then we ran into a clown. He didn't speak, he just smiled, bopped around, and made silly hand motions. He resembled more of a mime than a clown. And he seemed to inch his way closer to us every few seconds. Me and B laughed, B patted him on the shoulder, and we walked away. That was weird, I told B. That was more creepy than weird, said B. We were walking back to my house now on the sidewalks of the quiet Tuesday night neighborhood roads. And that's when we heard something from behind us. It was a pair of footsteps. We turned, but didn't see anyone. This continued for another few minutes. B said he was freaked out and was gonna go home, but I convinced him to stay with me and hang out at my place, honestly because I was scared now. We were sure we were being followed.
Alright? Cool.
We made it to the front of my house. I dug through my pocket, took out my keychain, and started looking for the right key out of the 3 in the dark. That's when B nudged me to turn around. There was a clown hiding in the next door neighbor's bushes, and he was staring at us. When he noticed that we had spotted him, he emerged from the bushes and started walking over to us. I began to panic, trying each of the 3 keys until the door finally opened. We entered and slammed the door behind us. I called my parents right away, who told us to arm ourselves and hide upstairs. We went up to my little brother's room and looked out the window. There was the clown standing in our driveway, looking up at the window we were standing at, as if he were waiting for us. I shut the blinds and we both ducked down. Breathing heavily and panicking, within 10 minutes, he was gone. I guess he gave up, or at least we think he was gone. For all we knew, he could have been hiding somewhere on the property all night. I'm just happy we made it home in time. If you've seen the news lately, there have been many reports of clowns luring children into the forest. I was one of the first to experience this, and it was utterly terrifying. I want to remain anonymous at the moment, just in case the clown finds out who I am. Anyways, here's what happened. I am 14 years old and live in a small town in South Carolina. The town has a population of around 130 people. Summer was just about over, and I had a summer job working at the local lumber yard. It was a great place to work. I helped customers load lumber into their vehicles, a pretty mindless job. Plus, I was able to stay physically fit because of it. The best part is that my house is exactly 1 mile away. Walking to and from work is a daily occurrence. I spent a long day hauling and moving lumber, and my workday was pretty much complete. It was about 9:30 p.m. when I started to walk home. The moon was just starting to light up the road, and the sun had completely set below the hills. There are no other houses between the lumberyard and my house. Our town is very rural. The road home has hills that peak high enough that you're unable to see what's on the other side until you crest it. The road is skinny with no shoulder, but it was freshly paved. The trees stack one by one behind each other in a row, and vegetation is thick with a few game trails coming out to the road. Crickets and frogs sound like an orchestra. The walk home usually takes about 30 minutes. I've done it so many times that I entertain myself with music. I put in my earbuds, throw on some tunes, and away I went. I was about halfway home when I heard what sounded like a high-pitched cackling laugh. What the hell was that? I said to myself out loud. I took out my earbuds and stopped. I thought maybe it was part of the music, but something about it didn't fit into the song. I stood there motionless, looking to hear the same sound again. However, the frogs croaking were so loud that not even a scream could be heard. I thought nothing of it and walked home. The next day, I started my shift at 2 p.m. I started my walk to work around 1:30. Nothing was out of the ordinary. It was a beautiful day. I usually look down at my feet and kick any rocks that I see. Having them skip across the fresh pavement was oddly satisfying. I kicked a rock and it skipped across the pavement and landed next to something strange laying in the dirt on the side of the road. It looked to be a bright red ball. I picked it up, I gave it a little pressure, and it squeaked. Immediately, I knew what it was. "This is a clown nose," I said to myself. "What the hell is this doing out here?" I kept it and carried it to work to show the other staff members. I even put it on and gave it some honks. It got a few laughs. The day went on as usual, and around 9:30 p.m. I clocked out and began my long walk home. I forgot my earbuds at home, so I was unable to listen to my usual music. While on my way home, I was able to make out a faint image of a figure about 150 yards away of what looked like a deer standing in the middle of the road. It was hard to make out as the fog hovered over the ground and the moonlight backlit the animal. As I got within 100 yards, it must have gotten spooked. I could see a rough outline scamper back into the forest. Little did I know this was not a deer, but something more sadistic. I passed the spot in which the deer had taken off back into the woods. As I walked by, I heard footsteps about 20 yards behind me. I thought this was strange, as I have never seen a deer come back onto the road once it was scared off. Before I could look back, I heard, "Hey there." I turned my head to see a clown standing in the middle of the road with his hands behind his back. He wore baggy pants and a baggy